This lesson will introduce, describe, and provide examples of partial interval recording data collection. Think of an interval as a time block, or a specified amount of time. So maybe it's 5 seconds, maybe it's 15 seconds, or maybe it's 5 minutes. Regardless, your intervals should be all the same amount of time. With partial interval recording, what we're really looking at is, did the target behavior occur during the interval? So for example, let's say the behavior we are targeting for data collection is physical aggression, and we've defined physical aggression as hitting peers or educators with an open hand, closed fist, or by kicking. We begin by structuring our partial interval recording sheet based on the length of our observation period as well as the length of our intervals. For example, if your team decides to use 5-minute time intervals and the observation period is 45 minutes, we want to ensure there are at least 9 boxes on our data recording sheet, so you have sufficient space to document the occurrence or non-occurrence of the target behavior during each specified interval. During your data collection session, if your target behavior occurs during a time interval, you put an X in the block. Now let's say the target behavior occurs 2 seconds into our first interval, and then it happens again 3 minutes into our first interval, and then again 4.5 minutes into our first interval. You only put 1 X in the box. With interval recording, we are not counting the total number of times the target behavior occurs. Instead, we are documenting whether or not the target behavior occurs during a predetermined time interval. If the behavior occurs regardless of the number of times, we put an X in the box, and if the behavior doesn't occur, we put a 0 or a hyphen or another marked signal in the box, indicating the behavior did not occur. We never want to leave an interval block blank, because doing so might make it look as if we simply missed collecting data during that specific time interval. So you always want to put something in each block rather than leave the boxes blank. A practical example will help to put this type of data collection method into a school-based context. Let's say that we're using 3-minute time intervals. Every block represents 3 minutes, and we have 15 blocks for our 45-minute data collection session. Now let's say that our student Luke was observed engaging in the target behavior of leaving his classroom without teacher permission during 5 out of our 15 intervals. Now, how do we summarize and report this data to fellow educators and our students' family members? Well, we typically do so by reporting the percentage of intervals during which the target behavior was observed. For example, Luke left the classroom without teacher permission during 5 out of 15 intervals during our 45-minute observation period, or 33% of our intervals observed. So why do we report partial interval recording using percentages of intervals observed? There are 2 main reasons. First, while we can't say it happened 33% of the time because we didn't collect duration data, we can say it occurred during 33% of the observation intervals. Second, typically our observation periods are not always the same length. Consequently, it can kind of get confusing if we say, well, the behavior of leaving the classroom without teacher permission occurred in 3 out of 12 intervals in one observation session, and 2 out of 5 in another observation session, and 3 out of 4 in yet another observation session. That data starts to lose meaning after a while because it's not really contextualized. So by putting the data in percentages of intervals observed helps to have some consistency across observation periods. Partial interval recording can be an especially useful approach to data collection when our target behavior does not have a clear starting and stopping point, like talking with peers, for example, as it's challenging to collect frequency data with behaviors such as this one. Partial interval recording can also be useful when our target behavior is occurring at such a high rate that accurately collecting frequency data may not be feasible. For example, say there was a student who was hitting his peers approximately 182 times per school day. It's hard to say that data would be accurate, as collecting frequency data in classroom settings, given the high rate of this behavior, seems incredibly challenging. Now let's cover a few tips for determining the length of time intervals used as part of partial interval recording procedures. Generally speaking, shorter time intervals allow us to collect more precise data. However, shorter time intervals also require more effort on the part of the data collector. This is especially important to keep in mind when classroom teachers are tasked with collecting data as well as facilitating instruction for their students. In classroom settings, we are always balancing precision and feasibility with regards to data collection. In other words, we want to select time intervals short enough to yield useful data, but long enough to ensure data collectors can consistently and accurately collect data. A general rule for partial interval recording procedures is that If we realize that most or all of our boxes are marked with an X when we begin reviewing our data, we probably need to consider shorter time intervals. Shortening our time intervals to document intervals during which target behaviors do not occur, as well as time intervals during which target behaviors do occur, can provide us with the precise data needed to accurately determine baseline rates of behavior prior to intervention implementation, as well as the effectiveness of behavioral interventions after implementation.